Remember what I was telling you guys when Iran and Israel were having their 12-day war? I said Turkey is accelerating its production of ballistic missiles. And I told you guys about this, and I said, why is Turkey doing this? Very obvious why, because Turkey is preparing for a war with Israel. That's what's happening. So Israel started this whole conflict with Iran. It did this Pearl Harbor style attack on the Iranians. The Iranians hit back against the Israelis. Nobody pitied the Israelis because Israel has made really Gaza into a giant human blender of carnage and gore. And then the Israelis said, oh, look, the Iranians are hitting civilian areas, civilian infrastructure in Israel. Oh my God. And everyone just said, yeah, and what the hell have you guys been doing in Gaza for the last 20 plus months? Why should we feel sorry for you guys? You guys bombed the shit out of Gaza. You have made Gaza into a human food processor. And now you're complaining about being bombed? We don't care, right? No one really pities Israel. And I said that when the whole war broke out. I remember I did a video and I said, Israel is getting hit. No one's pitying Israel. No one gives a damn. And so Israel said, hey, we're going to bomb the shit out of Gaza. Look, children are suffering. Ha, ha, ha. And they mocked the suffering of the Palestinians. They mocked the suffering of the Gazans. You had some Israeli woman making herself look like a war, making herself look like a Gazan in the middle of a battle zone. You know, she made herself look. She colored some of her teeth with black marker to make herself look like she was missing teeth. She made herself look like a victim of war, and then she was mocking the suffering. And then there was a video. This was really horrendous. There was a video of Gazan children screaming in pain because they're hungry and they're destitute and they're in the middle of this war-torn nightmare. And there were these two Israeli men, I mean, young Israeli men, they were soldiers, and they did a video going, I mean, mocking the wailing and the crying of these children. And there's so many examples of this that you can find on Israeli Twitter. And then all of a sudden Israel gets bombed and they're complaining about getting bombed. And so the world said, F you. You think it's okay just to slaughter civilians and then laugh about it? Yeah. No one really pities you guys. So during this time, I said Turkey is accelerating its production of ballistic missiles. And then just recently, Turkey showcased its brand new indigenously made ballistic missile, which can hit a target about 1,000 kilometers away, which is pretty significant. And it is I want to say a Mach 4 or Mach 5 ballistic missile. So it's getting pretty serious. And you really see this in the fact that Turkey is really creating its own indigenous, military-industrial complex. So it says here, shortly after the 12-day war between Israel and Iran in June, marked by Israel's Air Force dominance and Iran's superior missile technology, many Turkish citizens were left wondering if Turkey would take the necessary steps to prioritize such military focus points. In other words, hey, we're seeing Iran being the hero of the Muslim world. We're seeing the Iranians standing up to Israel. Turkey, why aren't you doing the same thing? Because what was happening and what's been happening in the midst of all this in specifically Syria, the Israelis are really flexing their muscle in Syria. They're using the plight of the Druze as a pretext to militarily operate in Syria and to bomb Syria. And this is really all a way by which Israel can show its strength against the Turks in Syria with the hopes of preventing Turkey from doing any sort of serious military operations in Syria. Turkey wants to control Syria. Israel doesn't really want that to happen. Israel wants to break Syria down into cantons. This is Israel's goal, supposedly. Israel wants to break down Syria into cantons, kind of like Switzerland. So you would have one region for the Druze, one region for the Alawites, one region for the Sunnis, one region for the Christians, something to the likes of that. So basically 4 cantons. And that's what Israel wants to do. The reason why Israel wants to do this is because if Syria is broken down into 4 little countries, then or four cantons, then Syria would remain divided. Syria would be no longer a serious, right? They sound similar. Syria would no longer be a serious problem for the Israelis because it would just be a divided country. Israel would have its proxy amongst the Druze, and that would be it. And then it would prevent Turkey from having a unified Syria under Turkish control, because Turkey sees Syria as a protectorate. In order for Turkey to fully control Syria, Turkey would have to have a unified Syria under Turkish influence and power. The Israelis don't want to do this. They don't want this to happen because they want to be the most powerful country in the Middle East. If there is a unified Syria under the control of Turkish power, then Turkey would be running that country, and Israel would have to face a powerful Turkey right next door. Israel obviously doesn't want this for obvious reasons, for very clear reasons. So this is the whole crux of the matter. And the Iranians stood up to Israel. Israel has been assassinating Iranian scientists for years, many years. Israel has been striking at Syria for years. You can go all the way back to the beginning of the Syrian civil war and read about Israel doing strikes on Syria. And then the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was Israel striking the Iranian consulate in Syria last year. And then that sparked a very short conflict between Israel and Iran back in October of last year. Things sort of calmed down, but they really didn't. But the bombing stopped at least. And then Israel decides, okay, we're going to bomb the Iranians. Now, this happened after there was a series of talks between the Americans and the Israelis, in which the Israelis pushed the Americans to do a joint strike against Iran. The Americans did not want to do this. Donald Trump said, I'm not going to allow Israel to pull the United States into a war. And then there were some secret talks behind Trump's back between Tim Walz and Netanyahu, in which Walz spoke to Netanyahu about the United States collaborating with the Israelis in order to do a joint strike on the Iranians. This actually pissed off Donald Trump, and he fired Tim Walz. So that was the end of that. And Donald Trump said several times that he would not allow Israel to pull the United States into a war. So the Israelis decide to do a bombing campaign, basically a Pearl Harbor style attack on the Iranians. And the Americans really didn't do much in that conflict besides just helping the Israelis intercept missiles. Nonetheless, even with that limited American assistance, there was still quite a significant amount of damage on Israel. And yeah, you could say Israel is still alive and well, sure, but just think of the psychological, think of the optics, right? Think of the psychological optics that take place. Watching Israel getting bombed, watching Tel Aviv getting bombed, watching Haifa getting bombed, watching a lot of destruction being wreaked, being inflicted upon Israel. Even with America's assistance, even with the overrated Iron Dome, you still see Israel getting inflicted with some serious destruction. Optics-wise, it looked terrible for Israel. And so what it really told the whole world was, hey, Israel is vulnerable. Israel can be hit. Israel can be bombed. Optics-wise, it looked terrible for Israel. And the Iranians were given this huge, enormous boost in the Muslim world as what? As a hero of the Islamic world. A hero that is standing up for the Palestinians and a hero that is standing up for the Muslim world against the Zionist regime. This was a huge optics boost for the Iranians, obviously, right? I mean, you don't have to be a professor of geopolitics to know this. It's very obvious. So what did that lead to? It got the Turks to be envious of the Iranians. And the people of Turkey were and are telling the Turkish government, hey, what are you guys doing? And so Turkey is in a difficult predicament because it's part of NATO. Israel is not a member of NATO, but sure as hell is a part of NATO as well. Let's just be real here. I mean, just by default, it's a part of NATO. It's a major U.S. ally. So Turkey has to play this game where, yes, it has tensions with Israel, but at the same time, it's trying to maintain some diplomacy because of the fact that Israel is an American ally and Turkey is an American ally. But Eventually, what's going to happen is there's going to be a major catalyst towards a conflict. This is my prediction. And as America begins to more and more get disinterested in war, and as this Tuckerite way of thinking gradually begins to dominate American society, the Turks are going to notice and they're going to realize that America's not going to stop them. And God knows what's going to happen. Well, I mean, I think we all know, right? There's going to be a war. It's going to be a war over who's going to be the dominating power in the Middle East. So it says here, in such a context, this week's IDEF, sounds like IDF, IDEF 2025 fair represents a milestone and a clear but calculated response to the vast public interest in Turkey's military technology, being the first major defense event after the short-lived war between the two Middle Eastern nations. So this is the first major event to showcase military technology after the 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran. So this is Turkey's way of saying, all right, there was this war between Israel and Iran. Now we're going to show you what Turkey can do. We're going to show you what Turkey can make as far as military technology goes. So it says here that Turkey's first hypersonic missile, the Typhoon Block 4, was presented. Let me just make sure you guys can see this. Yeah. You guys cannot see this. Turkey's first hypersonic missile, Typhoon Block 4, was presented publicly for the first time as IDEF 2025. Shortly before the event, that was at IDEF 2025, at this event. Shortly before the event, it was announced that Turkey's Steel Dome, an upgraded multi-layered version of Israel's Iron Dome, was activated to protect the Turkish homeland. Protect it from who? Who's going to bomb Turkey? Right? Who right now is the biggest candidate for bombing Turkey? You could say the Russians. Okay, that's eventually going to come. But for now, it's Israel. For now, it's Israel. And it says here, according to Typhoon Block 4's specifications, its high speed and advanced maneuverability would pose a serious challenge to present air defense systems in the region, some of which were compromised. Here we go. The article doesn't say whose system was compromised, but I think we all know who. Some of which were compromised by missile attacks in recent weeks. Whose missile defense system was compromised in recent weeks? Ooh, I think we all know who. I think we all know who. It was Israel's. Israel's missile defense system was compromised. And it wasn't so much compromised as it was really shown to be not as effective as people thought it was. Everyone was praising the Iron Dome, saying it was the greatest thing ever, whatever. But Iran proved that a third world country called Iran can be able to bypass the Iron Dome and inflict serious destruction on Israel. It's like, it reminds me of two movie scenes, all right? Have you guys ever seen the film The 13th Warrior with Antonio Banderas? It's a really good movie, by the way. It's one of those films that never really got the recognition that it deserved, but it's nonetheless a really good movie. It's one of the best films ever made. I would say 13th Warrior would have to be on my top 10 list of best movies, even though it was never a seriously popular movie, and I think the critics really hated it. It was a great film, and if you haven't seen 13th Warrior, I highly recommend that you do, because it's a great movie. 13th Warrior is a fictional film, obviously. It's a fictional story that is based on some actual history. It is based on the life of the Iraqi traveler and explorer, Ibn Fahd. Ibn Fahd was an explorer who went to basically Ukraine, and he hung out with the Vikings, and he wrote about them. And Ibn Fahd book is one of our best accounts. It's one of our main sources of information when researching and reading about the Vikings. I almost said Crusades. Close enough. So, in the movie, Ibn Fahd is hanging out with the Vikings, and he goes all the way up to somewhere in Europe, Ukraine, maybe Scandinavia, somewhere, I don't remember, but he's somewhere in Europe, and he's in this little region that is constantly being attacked by these barbarians, these savages, who are more savage than even the Vikings. And the Vikings need help, right? These Europeans need help to defend themselves against these savages. So these savages, they come in, they do raids, they kill a bunch of people, they kidnap people, they take people back to their lair somewhere in the mountains, and they eat them. It's pretty horrific. This is a cannibalistic cult, and they worship this Mother Earth goddess, and it's a very dark film, but it's very well done. And when you first see the savages, when you first see this horde of barbarians, the film gives you the impression that these barbarians, these savages, these attackers and raiders are not humans, that they are otherworldly, because you can't see their faces. They're covered in bear furs and wolf furs, and they are just bear furs, and they cover their faces up, and they put and whatever skin you can see on the face is covered in black paint or tar or dye or whatever. So they look very unhuman, and they're scary. And at first, Ibn Fahadlan, played by Antonio Banderas, he believes, or he thinks, that these attackers are not humans. He thinks that they're demons. And the Vikings who are with them also think that they're demons. Like, these are demons, they're not human beings. What are they? They're violent, they just attack all of a sudden. So, Ibn Fahadlan, he's told, hey, listen, you gotta help us fight. You gotta help us fight these things. So they give him a sword. Well, they give him a traditional medieval European sword, which is like a bludgeon. The medieval sword, if you ever look at it, it was made to hack. It wasn't really... you could thrust with it, but it was, I think, primarily designed to hack at the enemy. Whereas later swords were designed more for thrusting, to pierce the enemy with the point of the sword. Ibn Fahadlan is a Middle Easterner, so he's used to using a scimitar, which the scimitar is for slashing, but it's also thrusting. And the scimitar is much lighter. It's a much lighter sword. The European sword, the medieval European sword, is too heavy for Ibn Fahadlan. So he eventually takes his European sword to the blacksmith, and he has the sword transformed into a scimitar. So now he has the scimitar. It's a much lighter sword. So at night, the savages come in. They're riding on their horses, the usual strategy, and they do this blitzkrieg attack on the town. So the Vikings, they try to defend the town. They're fighting. Fierce fighting is happening. They think that they're fighting demons. And Ibn Fahadlan is attacked by one of these savages. So he's like, oh my God, what do I do? He freaks out. So the attacker comes. He takes the scimitar out, and he just points the scimitar like this. He holds the scimitar to where the point is toward the enemy, and the enemy doesn't realize this, and the enemy is thrusted through by the scimitar. The scimitar goes right through one of these savages, and he falls to the floor. Well, the bear mask of this savage is lifted. It's denuded from his face, and you could see that the savage is not a demon, but clearly just a human being. So Ibn Fahadlan realizes it's a human being. These aren't demons. These aren't otherworldly creatures. These aren't monsters. These are human beings who have managed to really mask themselves really well to the point where we thought they weren't human beings. We thought that they were demons, and they intimidated us through this impression, but they're just humans. And Antonio Banderas' character whispers to himself, it's just a man. And he keeps murmuring to himself, it's just a man, it's just a man, it's just a man. So his fear, much of his fear is dissipated, and he sees another savage, immediately goes for the attack, and he kills another savage. This is a great analogy for Iran versus Israel. For how long did we get the impression that Israel is invincible, that Israel's Iron Dome is unlike any missile defense system on Earth, that Israel is just this super powerful military force that the Iranians stand no chance in going against on the battlefield? For a very long time, we were given this impression. And Iran is like Ibn Fahadlan in the 13th Warrior. It's just a man. It's just a man. Israel's not this otherworldly Leviathan country that is just beyond human. At the end of the day, Israel is human. It's a bunch of human beings who make mistakes, who have vulnerabilities, who leave gaps in their defense. And so Iran is like Antonio Banderas' character. It's just a man. And Iran has shown the world, look, Israel at the end of the day is only human. It reminds me of that scene from The Matrix Reloaded. There's a great scene in the film The Matrix Reloaded where Neo at this point is the one, He's the superhuman, he's the messiah for Zion, etc., etc. And the agents, who are programs, come to kill Neo. And this is right in the beginning of The Matrix Reloaded, one of the first scenes in the movie. And so the agents surround Neo, and Neo is fighting the agents, and then all of a sudden, he gets... one of the agents tells the other agents, go ahead and attack. At the end of the day, he's still only human. And it reminds me of the scene in The Matrix Reloaded where the Merovingians' men are fighting Neo, and the Merovingians' men have all these swords, and Neo is blocking all their attacks, and then all of a sudden, one of their swords touches Neo's hand. The blade cuts the flesh, and blood is leaking out of his hand. And the Merovingian says, you see, he's just a man. But you can make the argument and say, well, Neo really was invincible to a great extent. So maybe that's not the best analogy, although it is a great opportunity for me to bring up a really good movie. But I would say the 13th Warrior analogy really fits the story. I would say it really fits the story. It's just a man. That's it. And Iran showed this to the whole world. So it says here that apart... Okay, let's go back to reading this article. I know I kind of went deep into the movies, but I love films, as you can tell. According to Typhoon Block 4 specifications, its high speed and advanced maneuverability would pose a serious challenge. Okay, we got this, right? So this supersonic missile will pose as a serious challenge to the Israelis. And it says here that apart from military strength and growing local defense production in recent events, IDEF 2025 also highlights a fact. It highlights a fact. Turkey's emerging military-industrial complex has begun to exert more political influence in the country. And why is Turkey forming its own military-industrial complex? Why? Because it wants to form its own empire. It wants to revive its empire, and in doing so, it needs to create its own military industry, because if you are going to form an empire, you cannot be solely dependent on another power, because that way you can't really be a superpower. You have to be independent as much as possible, especially in matters of defense. Because if you're depending on the United States to make your weapons, guess what? The Americans control your military. This is why America loves to sell weapons to people. Now, of course, it makes a lot of money for the United States GDP, but still, when America sells, let's say, F-35s to another country, those F-35s are under the control of the United States. America could switch those F-35s off. So when you're buying serious American military technology, your military is controlled by America. So you really can't be a superpower if your military is controlled by an external power. It just doesn't work that way. So if you're going to be a serious country, a serious powerhouse that wants to control the countries around you, you're going to have an indigenously designed military-industrial complex. And that's what Turkey is doing here. So it says here, IDEF 2025, showcase of Turkey's newly born military-industrial complex. Local products now account for 80% of Turkey's defense output. And an emerging defense industry is growing in the country year by year. So every year, this thing is getting bigger. Every year, this Turkish military-industrial complex is getting bigger. And it says, local products now account for 80% of Turkey's defense output. So if you look at all of Turkey's military technology, 80% of the parts that are being made, that are being used to make this technology, are coming from Turkey itself. So this is really, really serious. And so now Israel is having to face a massive Turkish military-industrial complex. Now Israel has its own military-industrial complex, that's true, but now it's going to have to face a separate military-industrial complex. So if you look at, for example, Egypt, or if you look at, let's say, Jordan, these countries are solely dependent on the United States for its military technology and weaponry. Egypt is the second largest receiver of American aid, and a lot of this money goes into Egypt's military. So Egypt's military is controlled by the United States. Jordan's military is definitely controlled by the United States. So Israel is not really as worried about these countries as it is about Turkey. Turkey has its own military innovation. It's got its own military industrial complex. It is getting closer and closer to full independence as far as an indigenous, indigenous military innovation goes. So it's becoming a serious country, and Israel is going to have to face this reality, and it's not going to be pretty. Now, just think about it. If a third world country like Iran was able to strike terror into the hearts of Israel, imagine what Turkey can do. Just imagine that. Batu Koskun. Now, by the way, the Turkish language and Turkish names, they sound quite reminiscent to Korean. Am I just hearing things, or is this true? Right? Does anyone else get the impression that the Turkish language sounds Korean? It just sounds Korean to me. Batu Koskun. A Turkish political analyst says Turkey's persistent investment in both state and private defense sectors created a, quote, a new set of political elites that derive their influence from the novel setting of civil-military relations. So the military is becoming more powerful. Turkey's military industry is very influential in the government for obvious reasons. Because if you're making the country's military technology, you're obviously going to have a lot of influence because the government, the country, depends on you to make its weapons. Turkey's security institutions, including the army, intelligence, and police departments, are larger and arguably more effective and coherent than ever. And it's only going to get more powerful. So right now, the Turkish military is more powerful than ever before in the whole history of the modern Republic of Turkey. And it's not getting weakened. It's not getting weaker. It's not getting less powerful. It's getting stronger every single year. Every single year. And you think, well, America's going to be there to pull the leash on Turkey. But remember, Turkey is a member of NATO. But at the same time, it's a rogue state that kind of does what it wants to do because it knows that America kisses its ass. To a great extent. Because of Turkey's control of access from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. I've talked about this a gazillion times, but I'm going to keep talking about it. Because geopolitically speaking, this is the most important card. This is the biggest card that Turkey has. It's control over the access way from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. So Turkey just tells the Americans, listen, we control the access way. You want to limit Russia's access into the Mediterranean? You need us. Bottom line, you need us. So when Biden was president, Turkey said, hey, we're going to buy some Russian S-400s. And America said, excuse me, Turkey, you will do no such damn thing. And Turkey said, what the hell are you guys going to do about it? And America said, well, we're going to pull you out of the American F-35 program. You will not be able to buy F-35s, Turkey. Turkey said, don't worry about it. Because for years, we've been designing our own fighter jet, our own 5th generation fighter jet. And because you have pulled us out of the F-35 program, we are going to accelerate the completion of this Turkish indigenously made 5th generation fighter jet. And we're going to call it the Khan. The Khan. Now, they should have called it the Seljuk. I think the Seljuk would have been a much more badass name than Khan. Khan sounds kind of like Khan job. I don't really like that name. I think Seljuk. I think if Turkey really wants to make a really badass name for, if Turkey wants to label its fighter jet with a really badass title, I think the Seljuk would be, it would sound quite scary and epic. They're sending, could you imagine Israel and Turkey in the middle of a war? They're sending the Seljuks. Oh, damn, dude. That would be freaking insane. Imagine, the Seljuks are coming. But anyway, Turkey just said, okay, America, we're going to build our own 5th generation fighter jet. If you don't like it, we don't give a shit. The United States goes to Turkey and says, hey, Turkey, how about you guys start buying F-35s again? And what happens? Turkey says, well, we'll think about it, but we're busy right now, currently just making our own 5th generation fighter jet. So Trump visits Erdogan, and Trump says, hey, Erdogan, how about we get you guys back into the F-35 program? And Turkey says, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Wouldn't mind getting some F-35s into Turkey's arsenal. Israel comes along. Oh, this is crazy. Israel comes along, starts crying about it, and says, no, don't give Turkey F-35s. Why not, Israel? Because if you give Turkey F-35s, then they're going to be equal to us in the air. Well, why are you so worried? Think about it. Why is Israel so worried about Turkey getting F-35s? Why? Ask yourself that question. If Israel is this big, badass country that no one can defeat, if Israel is like the demons that Ibn Fadlan's character in the film 13th Warrior imagined the savage enemy, imagined the savage enemy was, or the savage enemy to be, why is Israel so worried about Turkey getting F-35s? Because Israel understands that Turkey could beat it. That's it. Why is Israel so worried about Iran getting nuclear weapons? Because Israel understands that Iran could beat Israel. That's it. That Iran has that ability. That Iran has that capacity. So if Israel really is like the demon that Ibn Fadlan imagined his enemy to be, why is it so worried? Because at the end of the day, Israel is like the savage that Ibn Fadlan's character in the 13th Warrior defeated. After which, Ibn Fadlan says, it's just a man. So it says here, okay, hold on, let's read some more. The Iran-Israel war boosted the desire for strong leadership among the Turkish public, even though Erdogan refrained from using the topic for self-serving political gains. And Turkey is certainly not Iran, with large military parades, where large military parades are tied to the survival of the regime, etc., etc. So the Iran-Israel war sparked anger in the Turkish public, right? That anger said, Turkey, what are you doing? Why are you making us envious of Iran? Why are we now envious of Iran? We should be doing what Iran is doing. What's going on? And the reason why Turkey is pulling back or holding itself back is very simple. Because Turkey has to maintain diplomatic ties with the Americans. But eventually, and we're already seeing signs of this, eventually the Americans are going to cut the leash off of Turkey. Because it'll have no choice. Because Turkey is going to say, listen, you want us to control their access way into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea? You better unleash us. You better unleash us, America. And America will eventually do so. Turkey flexes muscles with new bunker buster and hypersonic weapons. Again, this is about preparing for war with Israel. That's what this is about. And Iran's and Israel's 12-day war really acted as a catalyst to Turkey, for Turkey to accelerate its weapons production, and for Turkey to really accelerate the boosting of its own military-industrial complex. So it says here, Turkey this week unveiled a range of ballistic missiles and other advanced ordnance at a national arms fair as the recent Israel-Iran conflict has pushed regional tensions to the brink. Turkish defense manufacturer Roketsan, that sounds almost Japanese, Danielson, Roketsan showcased several new systems, including air-to-air missiles, ballistic missiles, and a hypersonic weapon. While Ankara has been producing Typhoon-type ballistic missiles for some time, the latest variant, known as the Typhoon Block 4, is notable for its hypersonic capabilities. Weighing 7.2 tons and measuring 10 meters in length, the missile is estimated to have a range of 1,000 kilometers, which means Turkey can hit Israel. That's what that means. And remember what Eric Weinstein said recently. I talked about this in one of my recent videos. Eric Weinstein, by far, one of the most influential Jewish thinkers in American society, was on the Piers Morgan show recently, and he said, we are witnessing the end of Israel. And he said, we saw the damage that Iran inflicted on Israel. Now, this is what Weinstein said. I don't know how he found this out. I'm not sure, but this is what he said. Eric Weinstein said that Iran had restraint when it struck the Israelis. And I think he's right. I don't think you have to find some sort of document to prove that. I think he is right, because Iran showed restraint when it hit the U.S. air base, or when it fired at the U.S. air base in Saudi Arabia, when it fired at the Al Ubaid air base. Iran did show self-restraint. And I think it obviously showed self-restraint when it hit Israel. Yes, Iran did hit civilian areas. It also hit military areas as well. But we all know very, very well, this is quite obvious, just given the arsenal that Iran has, we all know very well that Iran could have done a lot more damage if it wanted to. So therefore, ergo, Iran showed self-restraint when it hit Israel. It demonstrated this. And what Eric Weinstein said was that the Israelis are filled with hubris because the Israelis came out and said, look, the Iranians couldn't even kill a lot of us. They couldn't even inflict that much damage. And according to Weinstein, the Iranians saw the hubris of Israel and said, what's wrong with you people? We were showing restraint when we hit you guys. We could hit you far, far worse. We could inflict far worse damage if we wanted to, but we didn't. This is a warning to you. And so what Weinstein was saying was that Iran is warning the Israelis. We've shown restraint this time around, but for the next time, we're not going to be as nice. We're not going to be as restrained as we are with this one, as we are with this barrage of attacks. And so what happens, and this is what Weinstein observed, what happens when those ballistic missiles are armed with nuclear weapons? And to express the conclusion that Mr. Weinstein came to, we are witnessing the beginning of the end of Israel. And now we see Turkey making ballistic missiles. They've already made a ballistic missile. We see Turkey showcasing its new ballistic missile that can hit a target 1,000 kilometers away. That means that Turkey can hit Israel. Now think about it. If you dropped a nuke, now Iran is a fairly big country, right? All right, it's like 4 times the size of Iraq. If you drop a nuke on Iran, Iran still lives. If you drop one nuke on Tel Aviv, Israel's gone. If you drop several nukes on Tel Aviv, Israel is definitely gone. How do I know this? Because there are around 7 million people who live in Tel Aviv and in the Tel Aviv area. So they live in the city of Tel Aviv, and they also live in the adjacent areas around Tel Aviv. 7 million people live in Tel Aviv and in the Tel Aviv area. If 7 million people are gone, that would mean only 2 million people will be left in Israel. And those people are going to be mainly settlers, people who are living in the West Bank. They're Israelis. Israel is done. It's gone. And I don't say this because I like this idea. Please understand this. I'm not saying this with glee. I'm not saying this because I want this to happen. I don't want this to happen. I don't want to see more bloodshed. But this is my observation, just as this is the observation of Eric Weinstein. And you have these people, this is what I don't understand. Every time I do a video on this topic, I'll get one of these guys who will come along and say, Theodore, you don't know what you're talking about because the Israelis control everything. There's this type of, and I actually wanted to talk to you guys about this. There is a type of political mind that is growing, especially online. So you have, for example, you have your regular political factions that everyone knows about. You have your liberals, you have your conservatives. The liberals are what? They're Democrats, pro-abortion. They're somewhat more critical of Israel than the Republicans are, than the conservatives are. They will support certain things that are against tradition, right? These are your basic liberals. Basic liberals. They're not necessarily even bad people, but they're liberal nonetheless. Then you have your conservative. They vote Republican no matter what. Even if they don't like the candidate, they'll vote for him because he's Republican. They watch Fox News all day. They think Trump is great no matter what he does. They love Israel no matter what evil Israel does. This is your run-of-the-mill American conservative. And then you have, and listen, conservatives come in different flavors depending on the country that you go to, or even depending on the region of America that you go to. So you can go to Russia, and I'm sure Russia has its own flavor of conservative. I'm sure you have your run-of-the-mill basic Russian conservative. They watch Russia Today. They read Sputnik or something. And then you have your basic liberals. Maybe they love Lenin. Some people like that. But then there is the other type of political mind. This is a political mind that is sort of in the minority. They were sort of in the fringe for the longest time, but they're quickly becoming mainstream. And this is the political mind that is contrarian. They're the type of person that will say Israel controls everything. They control everything. No one's going to stop Israel. America's not going to stop Israel because the American politicians are terrified of the Israelis and everyone's terrified. This type of person. They almost they hate Israel. They'll express hatred towards Israel, but they will describe Israel in a way that makes Israel look like an omnipotent creature that can never be defeated. They speak in a way that makes Israel sound like an omnipresent, omnipotent, invincible being. And so if I say, listen, we're seeing the beginning of the end of Israel, I'll get these contrarians who come along and they'll say, no, because Israel can never be defeated. And they don't like Israel. You have people who love Israel and they'll say Israel can never be defeated. Those people worship Israel. But then you have people, it's sort of like Gnosticism, right? In the Gnostic theology, you have God and the devil, and God is good, the devil is evil, and that's true. But what the Gnostic heresy does is it makes the devil equal in power to God. So God is good, the devil is evil. God is the opposite of evil, the devil is the opposite of good, but they're both equal in their power. And so you have a sort of Gnostic paradigm when it comes to the pro-Israel versus anti-Israel crowd. You have the people who are so pro-Israel that they worship Israel, and they'll say Israel can never be defeated. These people describe Israel as if Israel is this invincible, omnipotent being that just can never be stopped. But then you have this other type of person who hates Israel, and they're the opposite. They're in the opposite part of the coin from the guy who worships Israel. These people hate Israel, but they will make it out as if Israel is invincible. Israel can never be defeated. No. And these people are just as crazy as the people who say that Israel can do no wrong and Israel can never be defeated. They're just as crazy. They're just as sick. Maybe even worse than the pro-Israel people who worship Israel, because these types of people will worship Hitler. But they'll say Israel can never be defeated. Israel, that's never going to happen. No, it's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Never going to happen. And you people you're contrarian to a fault. You want to exhume this personality of a free thinker. You want to exhume this impression of being a free thinker. I'm a free thinker, but you're just a contrarian. And a contrarian is not a free thinker. A contrarian is actually controlled. Whether he knows it or not, he's actually controlled. Because with a contrarian, all you have to do to get a contrarian to say what you want, you just say the opposite of what you mean. So if you are critical of Israel and you're dealing with a contrarian, just say, I love Israel. And the contrarian will say, Israel sucks. And you got him to say what you want him to say. They're just controlled. Because their knee-jerk reaction to everything is just to say the opposite, be the opposite. They're controlled under this facade of being a free thinker, but they're really not, right? But you have these people who say Israel can never be, we will never see the downfall of Israel because Israel's so powerful. Bullshit. That's bullshit. How do I know that? We literally saw the bullshit of this way of thinking demonstrated just a number of weeks ago when Israel got attacked by Iran. Counterattacked, I should say, by the Iranians. And America couldn't prevent that destruction from being inflicted upon the Israelis. So we saw it. Plain and simple. We saw it. It's very obvious. Israel can be defeated. Now let's get back to this article here. The unveiling of the Typhoon Block 4 has generated significant media attention, especially as Iran's use of ballistic and hypersonic missiles against Israel remains under close scrutiny across the region. So basically, oh my God, Israel got hit with what? Iranian ballistic missiles, and then Turkey all of a sudden has a giant freaking missile, and they put some hijab on it, they put some curtain on it, and they go, here is the great unveiling. And they denude the missile, and they show the whole world the missile, and it's a hypersonic, long-range missile that can hit a target 1,000 kilometers away. So people are wondering, wait a second, Iran hit Israel with hypersonic missiles. Turkey is now showcasing its own hypersonic missile. What's happening here? Oh, I know what's happening. It's very obvious. Turkey is in competition with Iran. Turkey is in competition with Iran. They're rivaling over who can be the biggest threat to Israel. So right now, Iran is the winner because they've actually hit Israel. But now Turkey is saying, no, we can be better than Iran. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think eventually what's going to happen is the Iranians and the Turks are just going to tag team against Israel. That's what I think is going to happen in the end. And ain't no one going to stop them. America will say, Israel, we had a really good run. But anytime we talk about helping you, we get a whole mob of Tucker Carlson fans. And they're saying, no more wars for Israel. No more wars. No more wars. So it's very unpopular for us to do this. It's very unpopular for us to do this. Sorry, Israel. And Russia's going to say, Israel, Iran's our ally. And this whole time you've been messing with our allies. So tough luck. Despite Iran's vulnerable air defenses, it has effectively employed such weapons to strike deep into Israel, including targets in Tel Aviv. In today's modern battlefield, the importance of hypersonic ballistic missiles has become abundantly clear, as recent events have shown. Ooh, what does that mean? And this is being said by a Turk, by the way. Murat İnkici. I'm telling you, dude. Someone has to do a study on Turkish and Korean. They sound so similar. I remember I was watching a Korean movie, a South Korean movie years ago, and I heard the language and I said, is that Turkish? It sounds like Uzbek or Kazakh Turkish. Murat İnkici, general manager of Roketsan, at the International Defense Industry Fair, IDEF, on Tuesday. Okay, so the guy who is the general manager of the company who made the missile is saying, in today's modern battlefield, the importance of hypersonic ballistic missiles has become abundantly clear, as recent events have shown. What recent events are these? Do tell, Mr. İnkici. Do tell, Mr. Murat İnkici. Tell us what recent events. What recent events he's not telling us. But we all know what he's saying. We can read between the lines. He is referring to the bombing of Israel. So he's saying, we all know how important hypersonic missiles are because, hell, we just watched Israel getting pounded with hypersonic missiles, so we got to make our own. We got to make some serious hypersonic missiles so we can pound Israel as well. That's what this is. Haluk Gurgun, president of Turkey's Defense Industry Agency, told reporters that several additional missile and hypersonic weapon projects are underway and will be unveiled to the public in due course. Oh, so there's more. They're not even showing their full power. They're showing just a little bit of what they got. Here's one missile that we made, Israel. We got some more coming. We've made some more hypersonic missiles, or we're currently making more different types of hypersonic missiles. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said in June that Turkey would strengthen its deterrence by increasing its stockpile of medium and long-range missiles. In January, Erdogan announced that Ankara had successfully developed a new missile called Cenk. Oh God, dude, check this out. With a 2,000 kilometer range, intended for use in Turkey's space program. They have successfully developed a new missile called the Cenk. Now, they should call it the Seljuk. I don't know why they're not. Why is Seljuk, when you say the name Seljuk, there's something about it that just instills fear. Because the Seljuks, they were really the founders of Turkey. if you think about it, right? The original inhabitants of that country that we call Turkey are really just the descendants of Greeks and other Indo-Europeans, Lydians, Hittites, who were living there for thousands of years. Those people eventually got Turkified by the Seljuks. Seljuks were people who came from Turkmenistan in Central Asia. So the Seljuks they really laid the foundation for the Ottoman Empire. So I don't know why they're not calling their weapons the Seljuks, right? The Seljuk. Yeah, they're calling the missile Cenk as if they named it after freaking Cenk Uyghur. Now remember, when Israel started bombing Gaza, they actually got a missile and they wrote Cenk Uyghur. I'm not joking, this actually happened. Look it up. When the bombing of Gaza began, some Israeli guy put the name Cenk Uyghur on one of the bombs and dropped it on Gaza. I'm not joking. Look into this. So it's almost like Turkey heard about that and said, okay, we're taking this shit personally. They put the name of one of our people on one of their bombs. We're gonna name a whole freaking ballistic missile after Cenk freaking Uyghur. We're launching the Cenk Uyghur at them bastards. Israel, you put a name of one of our people on your bomb that you used to kill people. We're sending in the Cenk. Oh yeah. Now, me personally, I would call the missile the Seljuk. Or I would call a Turkish fighter jet the Seljuk. So that way, when the enemy hears about your coming, they would say, the Seljuks are coming, the Seljuks are coming. And this thing can hit a target 2,000 kilometers away. 2,000 kilometers away. That's insane. At the defense fair, Roketsan also introduced the 300ER air-launched missile, capable of striking targets over 500 kilometers away when deployed from platforms such as fighter jets and drones. Interesting. Additionally, the Roketsan unveiled the development of the Simsek-2 satellite launch vehicle, an advanced two-stage liquid-fueled system capable of carrying a 1.5-ton payload to an orbit about 700 kilometers. This marks a significant milestone in Turkey's space technology ambitions. So they want to be able to go into space. It's not looking good for Israel, I'll tell you that right now. It is not looking good for Israel, guys. They have Iran to deal with, and now they have this rising Turkish military-industrial complex to deal with.